You're listening to the Jan Price Show, and today my guest is Dan Partland, and we're going to be talking about his brand new documentary entitled Untruth, which is very timely. Very, very timely. Welcome to the show, Dan. It's good to have you here. You are an award-winning documentary filmmaker. By the way, you've done quite a few wonderful documentaries. Let's talk about Untruth, and it's number one right now, which is fabulous.
Thank you for having me, Jen. It's good to be here, and thanks for all those kind words in your introduction.
Well, you're very welcome. I meant them all, truthfully. So let's tell the audience what Untruth is about so they'll know what we're talking about.
Well, it's Untruth, the Psychology of Trumpism. And in 2020, in the lead up to the 2020 election, I did a film called Unfit, the Psychology of Donald Trump. And the idea to that film was that we were all endlessly consumed with the 24-hour news cycle, the scandal of the day. And the effort was, how do I found myself that I was consuming endless amounts of news and getting very little insight from it. And yet there were always new scandals, there were always new crises, but there was a sameness to them. And in trying to understand the sameness, what I could see was that the sameness was really emanating from the psychology of Trump himself. And so we went down this road and interviewed a lot of wonderful scholars and psychologists and mental health experts because it turns out they really had a lot of great insight into Donald Trump. And once you understand the personality type, then it became much, much easier to anticipate what was going to happen next. The news cycle stopped feeling like, an endless series of surprises and started to feel very, very predictable, up to and including not leaving office peacefully on January 6th, sadly.
Yes.
So the problem is that, I think I felt, and a lot of people involved in the film felt that, if Trump was defeated in 2020, then he would go the way of other defeated presidential candidates, that he would quickly disappear into the woodwork and become, a chapter in history, not a footnote in history, but stop having tremendous influence over our politics. And this is where we were really all wrong. And so the effort with Untruth was to try to not understand the psychology of Trump himself, but the psychology that is at work in the culture, the psychology behind what makes Trump so, so very attractive to some people and so distasteful to so many others. I think, for those who are never Trumpers, of course, it's unimaginable that people would be drawn in. He seems like such a unapologetic liar and a phony. I mean, that's been demonstrated over and over again, but it seems that his following that I don't think they question that he's a liar. Maybe some do. But it's more that it doesn't matter. And trying to understand why it doesn't matter and why they've made such a firm bond with him was really the goal of the film.
I know we shake our heads. We shake our heads around it. We're just so our audience knows, we are recording this the day after the first presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And there are a lot of there has been criticism because David Muir and oh gosh, I can't remember the woman's name. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, Lindsay Davis, I think.
Lindsay Davis, thank you so much. Who did fact checking last night, which just ties right into this documentary. And I was happy because it didn't happen in the first debate, and I was happy that they did. And somebody pointed out to me, he's saying this morning that he won. He actually won by big numbers, but that it was biased because they were fact checking him, and which is just interesting that he had an extra 6 minutes. We were a bunch of us were texting each other last night and going, "Do you believe that?" Why don't they, put that mic on him, turn off the mic because he went on so much with his lies. And so it's hard to believe that people, I mean, and then I read this statistic just right before we did this interview that 25% of the Republicans think he should, even if he loses the election, he should take over the office. I mean, that's just shocking.
Well, what the film gets into very quickly in trying to understand all this is it goes back to a lot of the work that was done in the wake of World War II, the rise of fascism around Europe. And this work really centered around what around the psychology of authoritarianism. What draws people to an authoritarian? How does authoritarianism work? And I think actually it's kind of an incomplete bit of science. I think it was studied a lot in the immediate aftermath to World War II, but I think very quickly the world felt that they could move on from fascism, that the world had spoken and spoken decisively. It took a world war, but fascism was defeated, and fascism became a bad word around the world, so much so that in 2020, when we were making Unfit, and it had all the MAGA movement had all the marks of a fascistic movement. We were cautioned, by scholars and historians alike to be very, very careful. Not certain you should use that word. That word has really been demonized. It's not really, is it fair? I think in the 4 years since, I think everybody's become very comfortable calling it exactly that. It is fascism. It's a new kind of fascism. It's American fascism. It, of course, differs from versions that happened in Europe in the 20s and 30s and into the 40s. But I think it's an incomplete science, the study of authoritarianism. And part of the reason is because it was so soundly defeated. I think we've taught it wrong. We've taught this history wrong. I think that in the era that I grew up, I think it was presented as a phase that the world went through that was over, that we had learned from, and that was now eradicated from the globe. When obviously, I think future generations should study fascism as a cyclical pattern. I think that there is a lot of indication, the film goes into this in some detail, that fascism there's a lot of ways that it fits into human psychology in a comfortable way, that with the right set of circumstances, an authoritarian leader can really get hold. And let's just look at that for a second. The question is, Trump is not that unique or unusual. There have been people like Trump throughout the ages. The question is, why at this moment in history was the ground fertile for his kind of a movement to take root? And it is a question of something that's going on around the world because it's not unique to the United States. These kind of right-wing authoritarian movements are on the rise all over the globe.
Yeah.
Right. So Trump is, it's been said, that Trump is both a symptom that then became a very important cause. He he began as a kind of symptom. You have to look at it as a symptom that people have suddenly taken an interest in this kind of angry, divisive, nationalistic, ethnocentric kind of politics. But then it became an amplifier. And so authoritarian leaders that were already in power, like, were already on the rise, like Bolsonaro in Brazil, then began to really copy from Trump's playbook, just as, just as Hitler copied from Mussolini, and then, topped him is that there was a sharing, there's been a tremendous sharing of authoritarian practices, up to and including the fact that when Bolsonaro was defeated in Brazil, he also had I think it was a January 7th uprising, is what he planned, where he was going to not relinquish power. So these things are in the water for sure, but then they also catch and they can amplify each other. The basic idea I think that psychologists can share with us and political scientists is that authoritarianism is likely it's properly seen as a trait that exists in all of us and can be activated by the right set of circumstances. And so the example I would give to this is like, you know, the I think the authoritarians offer something that is very valuable emotionally, even if it's not that valuable practically. It's speaking to people's emotional need. And I think the emotional need, for instance, after a nightclub is shot up in San Bernardino by a Muslim person, Trump came out and he said, that we needed to block all Muslims from entering the country. And I think this just made a lot of emotional sense to people as a response. Something horrible had happened. It was a Muslim person. Let's ban all Muslims from entering the country. The problem is it's not actually a thoughtful response to the action because sadly we have actions of mass violence in this country literally on a daily basis. The vast majority, 99+%, are homegrown, not Native Americans, but are natively born American citizens. So it made emotional sense. It didn't make practical sense, but it really had another goal as well, which is to divide people. And as a divisive tactic, it was very smart because, of course, the percentage of Muslims voting in this election was very, very small, right, in the United States. So it's a kind of instinct. I don't think there's much even intentionality or thoughtfulness on Trump's part, but it's an instinct to always double down on a kind of nativism version of a white America of yore when things were better in his imagination. And when people are in a period where they really feel like their material existence right now is very, very challenging, that message is very reassuring that there's going to be somebody who sees it clearly, who isn't going to be, caught up in some overthink, who is going to solve the problem. And Trump delivers that message. He delivers it effectively to a certain portion of the population, and he's continuing to until today. I think this debate that happened last night, who knows if that will be influential on the electorate, but it's very unlikely that Trump will lose any significant following because he has consistently had a very low ceiling of support because there's a lot of people who just would never vote for Donald Trump, but also a very, very high floor of support. And so I think the danger in this election is that depending on how the winds are blowing in the actual weeks while people are casting votes, that margin could tip in his favor or tip just as easily tip for him as tip against him, depending on circumstances on the ground.
It's, your film, when you watch it, you go, oh gosh, it's not hopeful.
Well, look, I hope it's a little
It's
bit hopeful. It's certainly scary.
it's inspiring, but go ahead, go ahead. I mean,
Yes,
it makes
right.
you think.
The goal is to be inspired. I think, and the goal is also I think, it's a tough balance because there's no point in making films that are just going to be depressing and just discouraging. But at the same time, we can't pull our punches. We can't shy away from a clear-eyed view at the current circumstance. And so what the film really was attempting to do was to talk about this complicated, I don't know, how it's sort of will never live up to my ambition because it's such a complicated picture to try to put together, but about the complicated interplay between actual difficulties, material problems on the ground where people are feeling that life has become too hard and unpredictable, changing too fast, and the relief of an authoritarian and the exploitation of disinformation and how all of these kind of swirl together to lead to a complex mess of conspiracism and acts of violence. This escalating, as it's said very brilliantly in the film by one of our experts, Denver Riggleman, who gave a lot of, he's a former Freedom Caucus Republican from military intelligence, put a lot of time. He became the chief forensic investigator on January 6th, and he really illustrates how the cascading effect of crazy really leads to political violence, because the whole goal of all of these different conspiracies founded on disinformation is to create a a moral paradigm where that justifies almost anything, right? If there is a moral problem going on that is so horrific that, going back to Pizzagate, that children are being, that there's a vast conspiracy, QAnon, a vast conspiracy from liberals and blacks and Jews to abduct America's children and squeeze the adrenochrome out of them as an elixir of life, and, have them tied up in basements of pizza parlors of the United States Capitol. Of course, if you can actually get people to believe that, what wouldn't be justifiable to end this terrible scourge? The problem is the scourge is completely untrue, and it's been the mainstream of the culture and the national press apparatus has been completely ineffectual at being able to burst the bubble and show that some of these things are just plain untruths.
And that's the part that is scary because obviously there's lots of different media and some of them that lean a certain direction keep perpetuating those lies and disinformation. And there's a large segment of our American population that tunes in to that or reads, those particular periodicals, and that just keeps perpetuating itself. It just surprises me that people can believe some of these things. It just, boggles my brain.
Well, it's surprising every day, but this is another psychological principle, that's the power of these information silos that, people are able now, with the complexity of, our information systems, they are able to curate their own sources. And when you curate the sources that are going to reinforce your worldview, and your community is also reinforcing that worldview, this silo, um, people lose their bearings in terms of, the baseline touch with reality, right? The reality testing that all of us do to get a check on ourselves, see if we're on the right track, is to check in with other people in our community who are like-minded, who we trust, who we know, our trusted news sources, etc. And if all of those sources are saying the same thing, then we're willing to go quite far. It really can move sometimes we call it the Overton window. It can move your reality field. That's really what it is. So I think one of the things the film tries to look at in diagnosing how that has happened is like what's new and different that's going on right now. And I think some things are just systemic. We do what you're talking about. We have a profit-driven news media. There's a lot of things that are good about that, but in the current moment, what's driving profits, what's driving engagement is fomenting grievance. Fomenting grievance is a very, very attractive thing. I mean, the news always, somebody once asked me, how come the news, there's not more happy news? Well, people don't tune in to the happy news. People don't want, it's not that they don't want to see it, it's that we're evolutionarily wired to be more interested in the problem. Something happy that's going on is great, but I'm busy. I got stuff to do. If there's a danger, I'm going to tune into that. And so our profit-driven news media really lean into this. And then we have the addition of the internet and social media in general, a very, very powerful tool at the moment, very, very poorly regulated. And so when you have that many voices who really they don't necessarily have any credibility, they don't necessarily have any liability business-wise, these businesses, unlike a newspaper, unlike a publisher who has liability, has a responsibility to say true things. You have so many voices out there that are really untethered from that responsibility. And we believe very firmly in free speech. And so our sort of free speech absolutism is causing us to really defend the rights of people to go out there and say untrue things that turn out to be quite dangerous to the society. And I think that's a new wrinkle that we really have to deal with. And I just want to say one more point on the free speech absolutism. We all want to be free speech absolutists because we believe it. It's important. People don't want to suppress voices. But the problem is that people really aren't aware that we've never been free speech absolutists in the United States. Free speech has a number of checks on it. The original check, of course, is that the number one check is that you cannot uh, advocate the overthrow of the United States. How about that?
Hello.
Trump did that one all by himself.
He's breaking all
Um,
the rules.
you also can't you can't incite violence. You can't, threaten people. You can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. Commerce has tons and tons of checks on free speech, truth in advertising.
Hmm.
We've as each one of these new challenges has come up, we've realized that as much as we want to be free speech absolutists, there are some checks that are needed to keep society running in a healthy way, and that's only fair to people. And I think we're going to need a correction of that nature on the social media side because it's
Somehow,
it's
some
rampant out
way.
of control and it's destabilizing democracies around the world.
Yeah, it is. It is. And yeah, and young people, that's where they're getting their news and these little snippets. And you talk to young because they're busy with their lives and with children and everything else. They don't have the luxury that some of us do now to watch news more and see what's really going on.
It's too much work. It's too much work to expect everyone to be a full-time fact checker of what's coming in on their social media feed.
Yeah.
And so they believe it or they don't believe it or they go with their gut. And going with your gut, it has its place in certain arenas, but not on facts. Not on facts. Facts need to be established by evidence.
I agree. And you've got, we only have a few more minutes, but when I was watching this film, I said the people who need to see this film are not going to be the ones who get to go, who will see it, probably.
Well, that's always a criticism of political films is that they
Hmm.
preach to the converted and that the people who should see it aren't going to see it, and what's the point? I don't. I think that that's a I think that that's it's a tired argument that doesn't really apply. I
Well,
think
I
there's a
hope.
lot of reasons for a film like this.
Oh, I think there's wonderful reasons for the film. And you have some wonder people that I really love listening to, like George Conway and Michael Steele and many others that,
Totally trusted, legitimate conservative
yes,
Republicans
yes.
speaking hard truths. But I think that a film like this is very good for a few different things. One is it lays out a case, it makes an argument, hopefully in a way that's digestible to a lot of people, and a framework for talking about some of these things.
Hmm.
That hopefully it activates the people who see it, um, and gives them language and framework for talking about these problems and addressing them, whether it's at the dinner table or in their own media creations or whatever it is. But I do think it has the potential to reach people. I think in our polarized society, it reaches few people, but I think it does have the potential to reach people who are on the bubble, who are wobbling, who are considering, who've had misgivings. This is really who it was aimed at, is people who have misgivings about Trump, but they just love Republican politics.
Well,
And so
yeah,
they're willing to hold their nose and vote for him. And the idea is really just to make the case that, like, it is not worth that.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing that surprises me. I had a friend and we had lunch. This is before Biden left the race. This is before the first debate. And we talked and she at least listened to me. And she said, I'm from Texas. I'm a Republican. I always vote Republican. It's like, okay, I mean, I voted for both parties, in different elections, throughout my lifetime. You vote for the candidate, but the one good thing is, I mean, I do want people to see this, and I have spread the word. I have
Thank you.
sending text messages and emails to everybody. You must see this movie. And everybody should see this movie, no matter what your belief system is, because it is eye-opening and there's a lots of wonderful things. And I think it's definitely people should be seeing it, especially now before the election. So having said that, Dan, where can people see Untruth?
People can see it pretty much anywhere where you can get videos on demand. I'll tell you right now, it's on Apple, it's on iTunes, it's on Google Play, YouTube, Microsoft, DirecTV, Fandango at Home, Xfinity, Fios, Spectrum, Cox,
Wow.
Comcast, Shaw, Bell,
It's
and Dish.
it's everywhere. It's
It's
everywhere.
everywhere. It's everywhere. And people say, "Oh, is it on Netflix?" It's not on Netflix. It's on in order to reach we literally the plan is to be available to 100% of the audience in the United States. The way to do that and not only be available to Netflix subscribers or Disney subscribers is to put it on all of these other platforms
All of them.
because
And I
everyone
think
has one of them.
that's great. Thank you. Everybody seek out Untruth. It's a really well done documentary. Will open your eyes. You'll learn a lot. And it's a great, great, great documentary. Dan, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. It's been very much a pleasure to have you on the show today. And I wish you much success with Untruth. And I look forward to your next documentary.
Thank you so much, John. Great to be with you.
You're so welcome.